Welcome to Commsverse. This session is called Keys to the Ultimate Guide to Approval Tasks and Other Activities in Teams using Adaptive Cards. And today will be presented to you by Davide Ranchetti.
Hi everyone, and welcome to my session. Thank you, Dave, for the quick introduction. So this session is about 45 minutes long. We're going to have 30, 35, maximum 40 minutes of presentation and demo, and then we will address questions and answers with the remaining time. This is a Teams live event, so you have a Q&A button that you can use to drop your questions at any time during the presentation. So don't worry, don't wait till the end, and as soon as you come up with something, just ask. I can actually show you. There is a Q&A button that you can use to post your questions. First of all, I want to thank all our sponsors that made this event possible, Microsoft and a lot of other great companies. We have a lot of rooms in which you can talk with our sponsors and get some help with Microsoft Teams. As Dave said, my name is Davide Ranchetti. I am a lead solution architect at Core. I lead the apps team that is focused on Office 365 and in particular on SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. I am usually involved with solution planning and workshops. I own the solution design and architecture of all our major deliveries. And I also coordinate the delivery of our larger projects. A quick 15 seconds on Core. Core is a Microsoft Gold partner and managed services technology company for people and businesses who want to take control of their IT and drive their business forward. We specialize in Microsoft 365 and provide a wide range of services, solution and software to optimize your Microsoft investment. We are based in London. We have also another office in Poland, and we have customers from all around the world. If you want to know more about myself or about Core or anything else, we can talk about it in the breakout session afterwards. Now let's start with adaptive cards. Adaptive cards are a new cross-product specification for cards in Microsoft products such as Cortana, Outlook, Windows, Bots, and of course Microsoft Teams. Here I have included 3 simple examples of what an adaptive card looks like. We have a first example here with a picture and some content and a couple of buttons. This is clearly just an alert that allows us to see some content in another platform. In this case, it's a public website. In a second example, instead, we see a task that has been created into an app. And we can reach the task and interact with the task directly from the adaptive card. And the third example is taken directly from one of the demos that I will do today and shows like a policy review task that we can action directly from the card itself. So the card is a piece of information that can be static or dynamic, and that can be pushed to different channels. Of course, in today's session, we are focusing on Microsoft Teams. So let's talk about use cases. When it makes sense to use adaptive cards and how can we use them to improve Teams engagement and user experience. During this session, I'm going to cover 4 different examples. I will try to be as quick as possible, but of course, there are many more business cases that we can think of. The first demo is going to be about SharePoint news. So let's assume that your organization has a SharePoint intranet that is being used to publish news and updates. Maybe to increase engagement and reach people through different channels, you want to send an alert to your users in Microsoft Teams whenever a new article is posted in the intranet. You can do it as a regular team message using a Power Automate flow, or you can do it as an adaptive card and send an interactive card with some information from the article and also a button to reach the full article. And these can be posted in, for example, in an org-wide team in the main channel, or posted directly to people. Another example is for document approval or any kind of approval tasks. You know that there is the approval action in Power Automate, which is quite handy. But of course, when you assign a task using that action, the person gets an email in their Outlook, and of course can access the task over the web from the Power Automate portal. If we want again to leverage what Teams gives us, we can send the approval task as an interactive card directly to that person as a private message, and that person can actionate the task directly from Microsoft Teams. So they don't have to leave Teams, they don't have to move to other platforms, they don't have to look for the file, look for the task, it's there and can be actioned from there. I'm going to cover this example as well as part of my demo. Some other use cases, of course, you can integrate these adaptive cards with other platforms such as Dynamics 365 and send an alert whenever a new case or a new business opportunity is created or updated or closed. And of course, you can use adaptive cards also to collect input from the users. So as mini forms that can be actioned directly from Teams. What are the key benefits of using adaptive cards? First of all, they are reusable. So you can create an adaptive card once and reuse it across different platforms. So we can build our nice card for the SharePoint news and post it in Teams. It will automatically adopt the look and feel of Microsoft Teams. But then if later on we want to reuse it and post it, include it in an email, in a weekly digest, we can do that. If we want to include it in a SharePoint site, we can do that. If we want to include it in Cortana, we can do that. And it's always the same piece of information that automatically adapts to the channel that we are using. And second point, as I said, look and feel. It's quite easy to achieve a great native look and feel for our components without doing basically any kind of coding, because adaptive cards are low code, no code solutions. We use a very simple JSON schema to code our cards. And we can even use WYSIWYG editors if we don't want to touch JSON. There are simple visual editors to create our adaptive cards. And again, I'm going to show you an example today. So how do we develop adaptive cards? I have included a couple of links here to online documentation and to an online designer. So there is this website, adaptivecards.io, with an interactive designer and also with some examples. So you can start from there, have a look at samples and download some examples, or just start from blank and create something new. If you want to code the JSON, you can just use Visual Studio Code. And I can suggest you a very useful add-on, the Adaptive Card Preview, that allows you to look at the adaptive card in real time as you code. So you can see how your changes are going to look like. Of course, the look and feel is not 100% the same, because that depends also on the channel you're using. So if it's Microsoft Teams, if it's Outlook, and so on, but you get a good idea of how your card will look like once it's deployed. Okay, so let's say we have coded an adaptive card and we think it's ready to be used. How do we push an adaptive card to our users? Well, if you're talking on Microsoft Teams, the simplest way to do that is using Power Automate, which is, of course, the workflow platform within the Microsoft Power Platform. So there are a set of actions that we can use to send adaptive cards to our users. I have included some in this slide, but there are a few more. So we can post an adaptive card to a user, so as a private message to a user, or to a channel. So targeting basically all the users that are members of that team or that channel. Adaptive cards can be static or actionable. If an adaptive card is static, and this can be, for example, the SharePoint news, the user gets the information, gets the alert, maybe they have a link button, but that's it. The user doesn't send back any kind of information. Otherwise, cards can also be actionable. So it's not just a static piece of information, but we want the user to send us something back. It can be the example of a simple feedback form or a task form. So in this case, as you can see from the screenshot, we don't just send the adaptive card to the user, but we're also waiting for a response. So the workflow pauses and waits for a response. So stays paused until the user submits the information that we're waiting for. And again, I'm going to cover both scenarios in my demo. So let's jump straight into demo number 1. So SharePoint news. Okay, so I have a very basic SharePoint site here. Forget about the look and feel. It's not even a communication site. It's just an example. So I have my site pages document library here. And for any given page, I can action my workflow. So I can select an article, for example, the Ultimate Guide. And through the Automate button, I can start my workflow that I've called Commsverse Post News as card. So I select my workflow and I get a very simple form. This form is telling me what the workflow is about, and I can add a message. So I can add a message that will be included in the card, or I can leave it blank, and the card is automatically going to get the description from the article. In this example, I don't know. Let's post something. And let's run the flow. So this flow is going to post a card about this article in a specific channel in one of my teams. Of course, if you want, we can make these more automated, and rather than having a manual trigger, we can start the flow whenever a new article is published or whenever a new article is approved. We can definitely be a little bit smarter. I just wanted to keep it as manual as possible for sake of simplicity for this demo. So I saw a notification, so I can go in Teams and I can scroll down to my fake department team and the general channel, and you can see that I got a card here, available, of course, to all the members of the team, with the title of the article, a thumbnail, and the custom description that I've added. And of course, there is also a link here that redirects me to the article in SharePoint. So we got a cool, interactive, visually appealing notification through Microsoft Teams, and this has been posted in a channel. So how do we do that? If you want to code something like this, it's not, well, not even code. If you want to develop something like this, it's not going to take you more than half an hour. It's extremely simple. So let me go to Power Automate and let me show you the workflow. So the workflow we're talking about is this one, Post News as card, and you will see how simple it is. So at the very top, we have the trigger. This is an instant trigger. So for a selected file that has been manually selected by the user in a specific site and in a specific library, I have a custom message. It's an optional field. What I do next is get the file properties, using the ID of this file to get all the properties that I want to surface in my card, and then I work with the message. If the message is available, I save it in a variable. If the message is null, I'm going to use the description from my article. So I got the description from the get file properties action up here. And then last step of the workflow, extremely simple, I am posting my adaptive card as a flow bot to a channel. Let's see how this is configured. It's extremely easy. I'm selecting a team, I'm selecting a channel, and then there is a message. So here I just need to copy the JSON of my adaptive card and paste it into the message area of this action in Power Automate. So let's open Visual Studio Code and let's see how this is structured. So here is Visual Studio Code. You can see that I have my extension, Adaptive Card Preview, that shows me the preview of the article. And well, this is my JSON object. It's extremely simple. At the root of the object, there is the declaration of the schema, the type, this is an adaptive card, the version that I'm using, 1.0 in my case. And then as part of the body, there are the different nodes that make my card. So if we look at the card, we can see that there is a title, there is an image, there is a description, and the link button. And these are exactly the nodes that I will see in my JSON. So the first one is a text block for the title with the text, the weight of the character, if it's bold, bolder, or plain, the size of the font, and how the text wraps. Of course, in this example, I'm using static values, so my article can be anything. I'm not using variables. Once I copy paste these in Flow, I can replace these static values with my variables from Power Automate. Then I have the image, I have another text block for the description, and finally I have a block of actions. In this case, there is just one action. It's a link button. The action is open URL, and there is a link associated to that button. So let's go back to Power Automate, and you can see I copy pasted exactly the same kind of JSON, but then I'm using some variables. I'm using a variable for the title. I'm using a variable for the message and for the link to the item. And that's it. This is the first demo, extremely simple, 10-15 minutes, and you have a basic workflow that posts notifications to Microsoft Teams as adaptive cards. Let's go with example number 2. Example number 2 is approvals. So we have, let's say that we have a policies library. It's a document library with some custom content type, with some metadata, and of course, an approval workflow. So I can submit a draft policy for approval. Again, I select the policy and I select the approval workflow that I want to use. I can include a custom message. I can include an email address for the approver. In this case, I'm going to pick myself, obviously, and then I can run the flow. So what's the difference here? Now, this approval request will be sent as a private message. You can see the notification here. Of course, I'm using the web version because the desktop version is I'm using it for the live event, and I got a private message from the flow bot with my approval form. So I have a custom logo with the Commsverse logo, maybe a little bit too big. I have a title of the task, review policy, the user that requested the approval, the date created a link to the policy itself, so I can click and access the policy, and of course the approve and reject button. So I can approve. Okay, all good for me, and submit. Before I approve it, I'm going to open the workflow and show you what the workflow is doing. So the workflow I'm using this time is this Commsverse request approval, and we can see that there is a workflow running. And if we open the workflow, we can see all the different steps. And most importantly, we can see that the workflow is waiting for the approval. So the workflow is waiting for me to complete the action. So as soon as I submit this, the workflow will continue. So I can go back and you can see that the workflow is now progressing. I can extract, of course, the approval value, and depending on the approval, I can decide what to do, publish the file, update the approval status as approved or rejected, email the user, and whatnot. Another interesting thing to see is that this is a dynamic card, so we are asking the user to submit some information, and the card can also be dynamically updated. In this case, after the approval, of course, I don't want to keep showing the form because the action has been submitted. I'm showing something else. It's a brief summary with the comment, the response, and again a link to the task. I'm then sending a message to the user. Of course, this will be another user, but I'm sending a message just to let them know that the document that they have submitted has been approved. So let's have a look at this workflow. So this is slightly different. In this case, I am not creating the adaptive card from scratch because the adaptive card is actually created by the approval action. So I have the standard create an approval action. What's important to notice here is that I'm using the create an approval and not create and wait for an approval. This entire workflow wouldn't work with that action. We need to use this one because we don't want to pause the workflow just yet, because the next step is extract the adaptive card from this action. So I'm using this compose action here, and I am getting the adaptive card, which is an output of this action. Why I'm using a compose action? Because I'm then replacing a part of the content of the adaptive card to inject the custom logo. If I wanted, of course, I could inject other stuff. I could inject a description, some custom fields, or, well, pretty much anything else you want. And then, again, I'm posting the adaptive card as the flow bot. So I'm not pausing here. I'm creating the approval, getting the approval card as a variable, and then posting it to the user. And only after I post it to the user, I wait for the user response. So in this case, you can see I'm using the output of my compose action, but if I want to use the out-of-the-box card, I can do that. I can just search through the properties of create an approval, and there is a property called adaptive card. So let me use the adaptive card now, and I can rerun this workflow and just show you how the out-of-the-box adaptive card looks like. Running a test with exactly the same kind of input, and if I go to flow, that's it. This is the out-of-the-box one. So it's a little bit simpler. Of course, there isn't the Commsverse logo, but again, you can grab the JSON and manipulate it in Power Automate to customize and enrich the form. Then we're waiting for the approval, and well, exactly as before, once we approve or reject, the workflow continues. The last thing I wanted to show you here is that once the user submits their response, we can grab the approver's response and work with it. In this case, of course, it's the output of the create an approval. But if you have a custom form built as a card, we can do it as well. So let's jump in example number 3. So rather than having an approval form built using the standard action, let's create a custom approval form. So I have another workflow, which is a workflow that runs on a schedule and represents a periodic review of those policies. I can just run this workflow, and this workflow will pick any policy that is due for review. It's going to send a card as a custom action. You can see here I have the flow up installed, but if you don't, it doesn't change anything. You will get it as a chat from the flow bot. And this is the custom card that I've created. I'm not using a flow approvals. It's completely custom. I coded it and I'm giving multiple options. So we need to confirm what we want to do with this document. Does it need to be reviewed? Is it still valid and we just need to extend the next review date, or it needs to be archived? So when we code adaptive cards, we have a range of inputs. Not that many at the moment, but we have drop downs, we have radio buttons, text fields, multi-text fields, date fields, and so on. So in this case, well, I can say, for example, that it's still valid, and you will see that the card updates and sends a message to the user. So thank you for submitting your feedback. So very quickly, how does this scenario work? We run on a schedule. We query my SharePoint library. We filter through the library and look for policies that are expiring. And then we post an adaptive card to a Teams user. And in this case, we wait for a response. This is an interactive adaptive card, so we need to wait for the user's response. If we look at the adaptive card, this is the code. I can open it here in in Visual Studio Code as well. My custom form code, it's here. So again, I have the preview. You can see these weird characters. Those are just the variables from Power Automate, and it's pretty simple. I have, well, in this case, I'm also using columns to have content side by side, the document icon and editor display name and modified date. And then I have this input. What I want to highlight is that when you add input to your adaptive cards, you need to use IDs, and these IDs are important. You can see that in this case, this basically represents my radio button control, and I have this ID, which is review response, because it's through this ID that then in your workflow, you can extract the user input. In fact, if I go back to my workflow, I have a switch to see what the user selected, and I'm accessing this review response, which is an output of the previous action. So we use the ID in the adaptive card to get the output from the form. Okay, 5 minutes to cover the last example. For the last example, I'm going to switch to a different tenancy, which has preview features enabled, because I want to show you what's coming next in the next coming months. So I have this other very simple workflow. I'm going to run it straight away. Again, it's an instant workflow that I can trigger at any time and will post a simple feedback form to a user. So let's run. And let's move to Flow. Okay, in this case, the Flow bot sent me a feedback form. It's asking me how I'm finding Microsoft Teams. I have a radio button. I can specify how I'm feeling about Teams. Of course, I love it. It's really simple to use, and the training has been great. And submit my form. Again, I get a thank you message, and of course, the workflow is able to pick up these values and work on them. So let's have a look at this workflow, and in particular, I want to show you some preview features that are coming soon, so I can edit the workflow. Again, I'm using a fully custom card that I built in Visual Studio Code. But what's interesting is that if you use the preview features, you have an adaptive card editor directly in your Power Automate environment. So you can see that the post an adaptive card action looks very different here. we have some message variables. These are basically variables that you can use within your adaptive card. It's called adaptive card templating to separate your data from your logic. So you have on one side the adaptive card, on one other side the data, and they are not mixed together. So in this case, I have a title and a message. And if I click Edit Adaptive Card, I have a graphical editor to work on my adaptive card. I have elements here, for example, inputs, text blocks, radio buttons, images that I can simply drag and drop on my editor. And then, for example, this is a text block that I have connected to one of my variables in the template, in the data template. So here for text, I'm not using a static value, but I'm picking it from my data template. So two cool preview features. One is data templating, and the other one is basically a WYSIWYG editor for our adaptive cards. I can just show you a couple of examples, but we can simply drag and drop controls in our canvas and edit the adaptive card. At that point, we just need to save using the save button, and that's it. Now I don't want to save my changes, so I can just close it. Something that I forgot to show you before, of course, there is the update message. So if you want to update the adaptive card after the user has submitted something, you can use this field. It's pretty much the same in the old UI. So the current publicly available UI, it's this one. It's a little bit simpler, and but again, you have the update message that you can use to dynamically update the card. You can also use you can also decide if the card should update, yes, no, or you can use a condition and decide if the card should be updated as well. So for example, if the card has a couple of buttons, one is a link and the other one is a submit button. If the user clicks the link, you of course don't want to update the card just yet, but you want to wait for the user to submit the form. And again, you can see when I'm sending the email notification how I am grabbing the IDs of my inputs. So the feedback value, I forgot to show you, but the last part of the workflow is this email where I'm showing who submitted their feedback, their email address, the feedback, and the comments. So how am I grabbing the user input? Again, I'm using the IDs of those input, choice selector and my comment. So again, if we open the adaptive card, we see that the ID of this control is choice selector and the ID of the comments is my comment. So when you're working on the email, you can just inject a dynamic value, and as part of the post an adaptive card action, you will see you have some information about the user and then the IDs of your controls, choice selector and my comment, as simple as that. Again, in this case, I'm waiting, I'm using the action that waits for the user response. If I wasn't using this action, of course, I wouldn't be able to get the input. So if you need to get the input back from the user, always remember to wait for the user response. Okay, let's go back to the deck. We are almost at the end of my session. I have included a slide here with some of the things that are coming. I've showed you a couple of things. So the adaptive card templating that allow us to separate the structure and the logic of our card from the data. I showed you the Power Automate editor, but of course. You don't have to use it if you don't want. You can just code in JSON, or you can go to adaptivecards.io and use their designer. I've actually linked it here. So if you open the online designer, you get a similar WYSIWYG editor. that you can then use, and there are also a few examples that you can get from here. So this is like one of the examples you can open. You can see how the card is structured, and you can make your changes in this online editor. So if, of course, you don't want to use the public preview features, you can just use the adaptivecards.io online editor. Another couple of features that I wanted to mention are input validation. As things stand at the moment, we can't really validate the inputs on client side, and we can't even specify if the input is required or optional. But this feature is coming. Microsoft is working on it, and it will be released by the end of the year. And another interesting feature is the responsive UI support, because at the moment cards are static and are not really responsive, so they don't adapt to the screen size you are using. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Now it's time for questions and answers. I will go through as many as I can now, and then at 1:45 we can move to the breakout room and have a chat. The breakout room is just another Teams meeting. It's not a live event. Everyone can turn on camera and we can have a chat about this topic. You can chat with me, or of course the other people that will join us in the room. Please submit a feedback about this session. There is an online form that you can find here, and if you follow through, you will see that you can select my session and let us know how you find it.
Super, thank you, Davide. We do have some questions from the audience. So there was a question from somebody who chose to be anonymous to say, when you create an approval process, is this available to all users when going into SharePoint and clicking on Automate? So I think that was from your demo 1, where you were running your Automate directly from SharePoint. So is that available to all users, or how would you make that approval process available to all users?
That's a very good question. That depends on your flow. So the workflow that you create in Power Automate. So let me go back to Power Automate. As part of the workflow setting, you can decide who has access to the workflow and in what capacity. So you have different users. Well, this is, let me get the right one. So request approval. So this is my request approval workflow. So as any other flow in Power Automate, you have different roles. You have owners, so people that can access and also edit the workflow, and then run-only users, so who should be able to run the workflow from the library. So you can simply share the workflow with whoever you want. There are different ways of sharing a workflow. There isn't enough time now to explain, but you can share it with specific people, with Office 365 groups, with Active Directory groups, or very simply, you can just say whoever has an access, in my case, to the policies library, should also be able to run the workflow. So a lot of different options, but you can tailor the access to the workflow to your needs. So only the relevant people will see the workflow. But of course, if you want to share it with anyone, that's super simple as well.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is from Daniel Westerdale. So are there any tips or resources for incorporating data from line of business systems, so e.g. ServiceNow or Jira? How would you present adaptive cards from external third-party line of business applications?
Okay, so speaking of third-party line of business applications, the question is not really about the adaptive card, but it's how you get that information from the third-party app. Can be Jira, can be, I don't know, a SQL database, to Power Automate. So Power Automate has a number of triggers and actions. Some of them are, well, most of them are for Microsoft products like SharePoint, OneDrive, Dynamics 365, Teams, and so on. But there are also a lot of actions and a lot of connectors for third-party apps. So you can, for example, query a SQL database and get a specific row in a database table, or you can have access to items in Planner, or items that have been created in a service desk portal. I'm not sure about Jira, for example. You can have a look and see what's available there, but there are also APIs that you can use. So if there isn't an action or a connector to your third-party app, as long as that app has some kind of APIs or web service, you can call the APIs from your workflow, get the data, and then of course inject the data in your adaptive card.
Super. Thank you very much. And then the final question we've probably got time for. We maybe have a couple more. So if you've got any burning questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A right now, and we'll see if we can get to them. But one for right now. Do you know of any good documentation or blogs on how to build flow-independent approvals? So I want to work with adaptive cards, custom interactions, and also when the flow is over the default runtime of the flow, which is 30 days. So when I want to create an adaptive card interaction 30 days after the adaptive card was sent, I need a method for this. Could you explain anything around kind of default max run times of flows and how you might overcome those?
Sure, absolutely. So that's a very good point. I don't know if everyone is aware, but flow has a duration limit. After 30 days, basically the flow expires and just stops. So when we develop workflows, we need to take into account this limitation and try to mitigate it. So when you are creating an approval, and this can be through the standard approval action or using a custom form, we can specify a custom timeout. So if we go in the settings of the action, we can specify a timeout using this syntax, using the ISO 8601 format, and specify, for example, that this request will time out in, for example, 7 days. So this basically says period 7 days, or period, let's say, 28 days, 4 weeks. What we can do then to mitigate the issue, rather than letting the workflow expires, we can configure a run after. Actually, you need to configure it on the following action. So let's say I'm going to configure it here. I can configure a run after and say, actually, I can add a parallel branch. Let's say in this case, we just want to email the user if the workflow fails. Okay, I'm not going to do it now, but basically I'm saying that if the workflow has timeout, well, actually, if my action has timed out, then I go into this branch. If I get the approval, I continue in this branch. So I have a way of intercepting the timeout event before my flow dies. So through I'm basically managing the exception in this branch here. So you need to use the timeout either on your approval action or on the wait action if you have post your own adaptive card and wait for the user response. Speaking of blog articles, I can't come with anything on top of my mind, but I can have a look and maybe we can have a chat about it in the break room. I hope you found the answer helpful.
Perfect. Thank you, Davide. That's all the time we've got for this session. So if you would like to talk further, then following the session, you can find Davide in the session breakout area. So I've posted the link to that. It's goteams.fans/BRK110. As mentioned previously, this is a regular Teams meeting, so you'll be able to contribute with audio and video. So yeah, like I say, that link is in the Q&A. So thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the session and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to the breakout session, so feel free to join me.